All right, so hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Book Cafe Podcast. In today's episode, we will be talking about this book entitled Heart Tantrums, a feminist memoir on misogyny and marriage. And my conversation partners for this episode is a power couple all the way from Islamabad, Pakistan, Aisha Sarwari and her husband, barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani. So guys, first and foremost, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us, Omar.
Thank you for having us.
So, for our viewers and listeners who have been with the show for a while, a lot of you will remember Barrister Yasir Hamdani from episode 8, where we spoke about this book right here behind me entitled Jinnah A Life. So, definitely do check out that episode after you have watched or listened to this episode. So Aisha, obviously, our viewers and listeners are quite knowledgeable about Yasser and the book. He is, of course, Mr. Jinnah's biographer. But this is your first appearance on the show, on the podcast. So before we get to talking about the book, would you like to give us a short introduction and then we'll dive into the book? So yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. So I think mostly nowadays in my 40s identify as a woman because that has always been a very strong part of my identity. And it took over a previous identity which I had, which was I started off being Pakistani. I still am in a way, but I think the merging of those two identities now, where I'm a Pakistani woman or a woman of Pakistani origin and who is a Pakistani. So I think those two have merged in the last, I would say decade or last 2 decades, where the first half of my life was about being Pakistani. My dad was supremely, a patriotic Pakistani who had a very deep sense of identity. The next line, I was with a husband who had the same passion for identity, and somewhere in the middle, I came in with my feminist flag, merging all these 3 identities that we feel together. And in Hearst, which is my other publication in UK, it goes by the name of Heart Tantrums and Brain Tumors. Right. So it was really about how does a woman merge her identity as a woman, necessarily a wife, or she has a sick husband. How does disease or a brain tumor impact the identity of a woman who, not necessarily is known by her husband or, has a... So it really jarred my status in the world if I had a sick husband. So what did it mean? And I think these are all important questions that I try to answer in the book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And thank you so much, Aisha, for that brief introduction. And we will, of course, deep dive into all of the points that you had mentioned. So the next question, Aisha, would be, so this is obviously your memoirs. And if I can just make a comparison, we were very privileged to host Mr. Kabir Bedi, the Bollywood superstar, a couple of episodes back about his book entitled Stories I Must Tell. And he had written that book as a septuagenarian when he was already in his 70s. And his memoirs was actually, as far as I can understand, a counter to his late wife Prathama Bedi's memoirs, which came out posthumously in 1999. And so it behooves me to say that these sort of tell-all books or tell-all memoirs usually get written at an advanced age in life, or perhaps they get published posthumously, whereas your story is living history. You guys are still living it. So why did you decide to publish it at this point in time rather than at a later date? If you could help us understand
that. So I think I had mental health trauma, traumatic brain injury, brain surgery, brain tumors, mental health disorders like schizophrenia or Alzheimer's in their family. Knows this is a different realm altogether, and you live several lives at the same time. The patient lives it, the caregiver lives it, and it's superbly scientific, but it's also a question of philosophy as well, right? What does it mean when somebody is unwell or cannot be, what they're saying or doing is something that is really a chemical cocktail in their brain. And so what does that do to a relationship? What does it do to love or romance? Or what does it do to the idea of marriage? Take the foundations of all of those things. So I think those are all questions that once everything goes, you've lost the person, you've lost his personality, you've lost the reason you exist in so many ways. When everything is gone, what are those 2 or 3 philosophical things that still make you connect to each other, and so those were worth exploring. And I think that the memoir, in a way, I have lost my husband, the boy that I had married, altered or changed, and every time, every year, we have to reinvent our relationship because change. By the way, as a caregiver, I think that I'm very honest about the challenges that caregivers face, and then how trauma affects the brain. And then I challenge this idea that you're not necessarily well if you don't not have a tumor and be very impacted by trauma to an extent that maybe you're just as sick as a sick person. So these are all, they made for an interesting tale. And I think whoever read it, this was their story, because they've always had somebody in the family who fell ill, not necessarily through brain tumors, but who fell ill and it impacted them and, impacted the entire dynamics of a family. Drug addiction does this. There's so many people who are alcoholics, for instance, and then they see their parents completely go off, and, or their children for that matter. So anybody who has experienced life in this way, for example, people in the middle as well, people come back altered with PTSD. So what does it do to what they come back to? So I think although I wrote it assuming Yasser would not live this long, let's also he surprised me, and it was supposed to be about a man who's no longer there, but we're blessed, thank you science, to have him, and thanks to great surgeons and great medical facilities at the Al Khan, we are here with the medical miracle,
Yeah, absolutely. And Yasser, you've been waiting patient all this time, so I'd like to take this opportunity to bring you into the conversation as well. Can I ask, when did you find out about Aisha's book project? When was the first time that you had found out about the project? And given that you have such a high standing in society, you're Mr. Jinnah's biographer, that is what you're known for. You're known for being the person who got YouTube unbanned in Pakistan. And so it must have been was it a difficult decision for you to support Aisha's book publication, or how exactly what were your thoughts and feelings about it the first time you got to know about it? Please share that with us.
Well, it's the book itself is, very hard reading, because, I either come out as this crazy person or I come out as someone who's absolutely vicious and evil. So reading it was harder, but I felt at the time when we were right out of the second surgery, this was, and there was an article that was published, and that's when Aisha decided to write this book, and I was like, go ahead and, the book. And there's, I would, in my opinion, I see the discomfort that I do have with some of what is written in the book, but I would not be living up to my own principles as a free speech advocate if I was to object to it. All those ideals and about Jinnah and everything, and then you can't turn around and muzzle your partner's free speech, as it were. I wrote a foreword to the book, so I tried to kind of explain what it was that I was. Early years of our marriage, when we look, it's a terrible story, terrible what she's had to endure. And not just me. It's just the culture of it. The shocks. She was an expat who's coming to Pakistan. So coming into that, the way she's approached it, all of that. This is a story that definitely needed to be told. And if there's exculpatory speech, I've already given that as a forward. But yeah, I mean in what I say in the forward. I feel that much of what I did, I do have. At least I would like to believe that I do have an excuse for it, and that excuse comes out in the book as well, to a certain extent. So yeah, so I've been on board, and it's also, I am sort of a prisoner to my principles. So when they came out with, when they asked me this question, there were legal forms that needed to be asked me, to basically say that I won't sue them. for publishing whatever. So it wasn't, I didn't do a double take on that. I just went ahead and signed it, I think it's her struggle and it's her story and it needs to be told.
Right, absolutely. And I just want to pick up on one thing you said in your answer. You mentioned Aisha being an expat. So, Aisha, coming back to you, I think now is a good opportunity to deep dive a little bit into your origin story. As you mentioned in the book that you grew up in Kampala, Uganda, and East Africa. And just for my knowledge, and for our viewers and listeners who may not be as familiar with East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, etc. What exactly was life like uh, back in the 80s, living in Uganda and Kenya, as compared to, for example, apartheid South Africa and Zimbabwe under Ian Smith's regime? Would you say that life was better off in Uganda and Kenya as compared to these two countries, or would you say that it was equally difficult? How would you respond?
First, Oliver, let me appreciate your knowledge. Unlike other Desi people, you're not really looking at Africa as a country, which I really appreciate. And when it comes to identity, I must say that a very large part of me is African because my entire childhood there. I was 15 when I left. 15, yeah, thereabouts. And it was my formative years. What I did see was a lot of civil war. What I did see was a lot of poverty. I did see a lot of economic. Overall, I did see a lot of racism. Interestingly, racism targeted towards brown people, and mostly because at this time, just as you can see in governments that say, let's make America great again, let's go back to our roots. It's happening in France with Le Pen, etc. What we're seeing in Uganda in the 80s or when I was there was Africa is for Africans. These expat Pakistanis and Indians who take over our merchant, trade, who take over our commercial shops, and then they oppress us and they have colorism against us, so expel them. It means time and Obote's time as well, whereas I get rid of them. Whenever governments are failing, they always love to blame somebody else. So at that time, they blamed Asians, particularly Indians and Pakistanis. Now, having said that, I also understand why it happened. Pakistanis and Indians particularly are extremely racist towards Africans. So they would actually live in their country and treat them like crap. So there was definitely legitimate grievance. But we were the victims of it. It was a teacher. He, taught at a high school and then later at a university. And we were like, how teachers' kids are. It's actually a hashtag, teachers' kids. You're just really in your own bubble, living on a camp, thinking that, everything happens for a good reason. And so as an expat, there was this complete blindness towards, frankly, a very genocidal world, And my family responded to that. We've done good, so we're not going to be on the receiving end of that civil war, but we were. Our house was broken into. Shots were fired by these teenage army rebels at my mom. I was a very little kid. And impact on you. My sister would walk back home from school, saw dead bodies on her way. These are, again, generational trauma. Right. That then the reason I brought it up was because I asked myself, me, in the sense that there's always, what Yasser talks about, is essentially how somebody, can, be, say, mean somebody in a dynamic that is already patriarchal. But then what happens to the person who's receiving that and not understanding that this could be a sign of a disease and this is not normal? What made me normalized was on his part just something that he could not control. And then I had to go back and understand, what is it about what we teach girls? What is it in our cultural and religious milieu to be submissive by accepting and receiving and suppressing what you receive rather than raising a flag and saying, hold on, that doesn't seem right? And then I that is where all that Africa story came in. It came in as a way of how people who get oppressed invite oppression in so many ways. So I know this is very hard to hear, and I'm not saying that victims deserve it, right? In any form of complex control dynamics, I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that it is complex and it deserves a deep dive into what makes somebody more susceptible to a cultural put down, say, for example. Or even the third part of my book, as you're aware, is about workplace dynamics and how women entering the workforce are treated similarly. So I explore why it was so easy to receive that in Africa in my childhood, why it was easy for me to fall into that during the marriage, and why it was easy for me to fall into the same dynamic at the workplace. And we transition, the women of Pakistan haven't really fully grasped what is allowed to them and what is not allowed to them. And I think that in Yasser writing that foreword of my book, allowing me to tell the story, my bearing is perhaps the kindest thing that has been done to anyone, because whenever women come forward and say, I was hurt, usually they're told that they're liars, usually that they're told that, and they're told that you made it up. And they told that it wasn't that bad. And so Yasser's forward really, in my opinion, is a testament to why we got together in the first place, because we are things. We believe in, I think, being a prisoner to our values. I couldn't not complain or protest, and I guess he couldn't not encourage me to, in a way, right? And I think that one more thing I would say is that Yasser and I have always looked at ourselves as individuals, obviously, who are flawed, but we've always been very conscious of what we leave behind in terms of legacy. We're very obsessed with people about what does this mean for Pakistan, and we do so much outwardly for history and politics and that kind of thing. But in our mid-age, we felt that the reckoning has to be inwards. The lens has to be turned in.
Right. So thank you so much for that, Aisha. And you mentioned one of the things that really stood out for me in the book is that you both bonded over your mutual love and respect for Mr. Jinnah, as well as the patriotism that I know that you both have for Pakistan. And so, Yasser, would you like to tell the story about how you both met?
Yeah, no, it was what happened essentially was there was a website, and this website was called chalk.com. It was pretty popular amongst expats, Pakistanis and Indian expats. And it so happened that Pakistanis were trolled a lot on it. Pakistanis.
We now know that was cyber harassment.
Yeah. Being victims of cyber harassment. So we were like, that's where it started. She wrote an article, and I went ahead and just proposed to her. And, when I meant, do you want to go out? And she took it to mean that I'm, sending my mother over for a marriage proposal. Either way, it turned out to be more than a fling. We met in Lahore, we met in Karachi, and then we met in San Jose several times, and our sort of love affair took a life of its own.
And you did send your mom,
and then yes, as a matter of fact, your family went to my mom
on invitation.
Yes, on invitation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but there is some truth to that. Look, I was a girl, US with a lot of culture shock. I mean, Uganda, Kenya, and then the US, and I felt very homesick. And I miss my dad because he obviously, had a very cultural, literary side to him that I didn't have. And I really sought that. So I wrote this article on Kashmir on chalk.com, and here comes this person who I didn't know who he was, how old he was, but he said, Miss Sarwari, are you available? Now, to me, in my conservative, that is, I'm sending my mom over to you if you're available. And I'd already in my head said yes. To my defense, I was 19. And, one thinks like that at that age, I would like to say. And then I kind of, chase Yasser down and be like, this would be a great idea. And to this time, we have a lot of fights over Jinnah. Like right now, he wanted to sit on this chair. Mm-hmm. And that, well, you know what? It's more comfortable for you in the other chair. So I quoted a line that Jinnah had said, which is, Miss Jinnah will ask for shawl if she wants it. And I often quote this to him that if I need something, I will ask for it. And so it's this thing with us, like when I want to get through to him, I do use the scripture of Jinnah and what he said in his speeches. And we all cut out, like we have a life-size cutout of Jinnah, which I try to keep hiding from him because he wants to like keep it with him and I want to keep it with him, and we fight because I paid for it. And so we do have this childish charm still, I think, despite we are friends like we were when we were 19, 20. And that does come up often enough and that keeps us, I guess, grounded.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that. And of course, the details are in the book, so we won't spoil it for anybody who wants to pick up the book. But yes, the details are there. And this small trailer for the book, I hope that it encourages everybody to pick it up. So there's one point that I'd like to touch upon, guys, and this question goes out to the both of you. One of the surprising things that I got during your stay in Uganda, Aisha, is that it wasn't only if there was a divide between the Pakistani Muslim community and the Indian Muslim community with regards to the creation of Pakistan and Mr. Jinnah's ideology. And I had always assumed that perhaps it was the Indian non-Muslim community who probably had, this uh, tension with the Pakistani Muslim community about this. But the Indian Muslim community also being a part of that debate and discussion was a bit of an eye opener for me personally. So, having said that, and Yasser, I remember that in our last episode, you had your discussions with your batchmates in Rutgers, saying that what does it mean to be a Pakistani, and having to defend that point. At this in this day and age, at this point in time, have you both found the answer to what it means to be a Pakistani? Just for my own understanding.
I think, look, I think it's pretty clear. One of the things that is not going to happen because, one of the questions that has always happened to be on the back, every Pakistani's mind, I think, is whether the country would survive. But now at this point in time, I don't feel that the country is going to go away off the map suddenly one day. That's something that at least I much when I was much younger. I felt that it's just going to break up and stuff. And now those currents are there and everything. What it means to be a Pakistani really goes back to this thing. Anyone who's born in Pakistan is a Pakistani, and that is how we should look at it. Sure, we started off as this Muslim homeland, and I think what Pakistan means today is is the meaning that people give it, right? And there is this Pakistani secular Pakistani nation, which is unfortunately the legal regime or the constitutional regime hasn't actually followed it. Pakistan is very much an Islamic republic and that sort of thing. But yes, I found the answer in the sense that I am confident that at one point in the future, through enough cycles of democracy, Pakistan would go down the route of any modern nation state in, say, for example, Europe and stuff. That's my answer, if that makes sense.
Okay. And Aisha, anything that you'd like to add to?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up the Indian Muslim identity because, by the way, that's 50% of me. So my mom's side of the family are Indian Muslims. They come from this place near Goa called Konkan. And they're very wonderful people. They tread the middle road when it comes to culture, religion. And this particular community is where they really struggle to keep their identity. But I would say that expats, generation 1 or 2 afterwards, they really struggle to kind of be like, who are we after all, right? And I think they fall prey to what a lot of people fall prey to, which is that they use an enemy to define themselves, right? Indian Muslims, and particularly my mom's side of the family, unfortunately, at least the kid had, really been uncomfortable with my presence. And sometimes, you can be a symbol of something. You might not necessarily know this, but you hold an identity which is different from everybody else's. I would feel this that I was different. My dad was Pakistani, and I was not, merged into this very simple Indian Muslim homogenous group. I was different. Now, how did that difference play out? Is I used to be asked questions like, what was the point of creating there Indians and if they're Muslims in India? There was no need to create ruckus and riots. So, when I would walk in, I would suddenly carry the weight of this genocidal reality in someone's head of how Jinnah actually stood up for his ego and created the state that he didn't need to just for some kind of seat that he wanted, which I'm giving you a very simplistic idea, but these are all narratives we hear around the world where it's it's not necessarily phobia like the white world does or the Hindu world does, but it's powered by this general resentment that you made it hard for us. By you, carving out a separate state for yourself, look what's happened to us. Now we need to justify ourselves aligned. So then what they would do is, not them particularly, but generally Indian Muslims, have a struggle with then either align themselves too much with the nationalist Hindu identity or Indian identity, particularly, even if it's mentioned back. And they really feel that Pakistanis are this useless, insensitive group of people who just are an accident of history, and that we have the weight to now justify why we exist. Yasser was such a breath of fresh air for me, was because he was part of this generation of Pakistanis, which I wasn't because I was an expat, who didn't give a damn of creating that explanation. And it was enough that we were Pakistani simply respected, and that the understanding was this is a simple right of self-determination. It did not, come into being by an accident. Accidents don't happen. There's often a historical and political context of which one power groups from another power group, and and part of that is a right that's granted by the United Nations. So that entire legal context, that political context, was really for me something that allowed me to breathe easier. And we see that today, even for example, we're sitting here with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on our heads. And I would just say that when you have to define your identity by putting another identity down, genocides lead to that. You see that with the saffron-colored Hindutva policies in India. We see that even in our country. Like, we've always spoken up about, what we do to minorities in Pakistan, because, we define ourselves, particularly Muslim or Islamic, forgetting that there's an entire minority group that made this country blind to which religion it was. They just sought a political recourse, and it's fair. So I think all in all, I would just say it was hard growing up half-caste or half, Kokni Pakistani, and having to justify one part to the other, by the way, which I also faced when I came back. I know there's a lot of jokes about this, but I had to be like, oh, she's half. And I don't want to reject any of those two identities, frankly. I mean, these are both extremely important political identities, and I do want to merge them, including the African part, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for that wonderful answer, Aisha. And I found that to be extremely interesting because I wasn't aware of it, that particular discussion point. But yes, thank you so much for putting that in the book because it really helped a lay historian like myself to understand the nuances of that particular discussion and the conversation. And guys, as you both know, that our show is based in Dhaka, Bangladesh, so I definitely have to find a way to put Bangladesh into this episode somewhere. And so you have to, you can imagine my surprise that Aisha, 152 pages into the book, Bangladesh does get a mention, and it comes in the form of your father having a lungi that he used to wear around the house. So would you like to tell us about that? How did he pick up that habit? And how long have you seen it? Was it something that he did throughout his life, or was it something that he picked up after going to Uganda? So yeah.
In the campus we lived in, they used to say we were South Asia because there was a very close Indian family. We were the Pakistani household, and then there was a Bangladeshi household. So my dad was the registrar of that university. The Indian family was the librarian uncle, and then I think there was a religious scholar who was Bangladeshi, right? And the three of us really went along. We compared our gardens together. It was a family. So I think Bangladesh definitely always, when you're an expat, your national boundaries sort of blur, and you just get along because you just happen to be in some place. Abu wore the lungi because he was just a very chill dude. Like, he loved his I don't know, how would you put it? There's a word for it, haigi, which is like just comfort, softness, and he would sometimes, he was very well dressed externally, like he was in a three-piece suit or a konda suit, as you say in Uganda, but at home the lungi was a thing, and so was Bangladesh in that matter. And there was always this reference of it being like a neighbor, so yeah, that cultural thing did definitely come in all the time.
And Yasser, dare I ask, do you happen to own a lungi like your late father-in-law?
I don't, but you know what? My father used to go around in lungi, and he had, interestingly, he stopped wearing that once we started living and Aisha came and all of that. But he would, so I have very similar stories.
Okay.
My father wouldn't approve of being told on a podcast, because he was very formal.
Right, right. And of course, Yasser, I'm sure that you wouldn't trade your three-piece suit for anything, not even a lungi. But yes, thank you so much for both of your thoughts on that. And I really appreciate this particular story that was in the book, Aisha. Okay, so moving on from your life in Kenya and Uganda, Aisha, and obviously you both had met in the States, and then the move to Pakistan. Would you like to enlighten us on what exactly was the one defining factor that actually prompted you to make the move to Pakistan with Yasser? You mentioned something about turning Pakistan into a truly Islamic republic, and this was mentioned right at the beginning. So was that your motivation, Aisha? If I could just put that to you.
I have to say yes. Because my dad had this very interesting understanding of Pakistan, which was a lot of people from that generation, a bit, pan-Islamist, a lot like Islam is, not in conflict with democracy. Islam is not in conflict with secularism. Islam is modern. Islam is about women's education, about progress. My dad was an educationist, and he was very well read in history and geography. That was what he taught. So he had this thing about really Pakistan for the Muslims, and he did maybe back that there might be people who might not want that identity overall, right? I don't think he went that far. I don't think it was ill-intentioned, but it was a little underdeveloped as a theory. I would say that. And I think Yasser, I definitely challenged my own views on that matter about, a lot of, like they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. A lot of people, when they are formulating their identity on a religious construct, well-meaning way, be exclusivist, right? And so in Yasser's opinion, Jinnah was the exact opposite, right? He made it clear over and over again in his speeches that, we're not a state to be ruled by priests. And that's what my dad's idea. He really felt that a true Islamic state would be one where there's equality, there's welfare. And so when I was in my 20s, I really thought that I could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a conversation that we could probably have, and we could probably extend it to a 2 hour podcast, but we'll try and save it for a future episode. But right at this point, guys, I would like to ask a couple of difficult questions because, after all, Aisha, these are your memoirs, and of course, right after your marriage to Yasser, it wasn't the most rosiest of pictures, right? So one of the questions that I would like to ask, and of course you mentioned it in the book a couple of times, but for the sake of our viewers and listeners who haven't read the book yet, uh, what is the reason why you put up with it, or why you chose to stay in quote unquote an abusive relationship? And for that matter, why do most women, why would any woman want to continue in a relationship which is deemed abusive? So if you could just help us understand that a bit more.
It's a very good question, and I that is answered by my mom, my khalas, my aunts, anybody that I see around me, right from my mother-in-law who has South Asian descent, who is not normalized into the understanding that if your husband is cross with you, it's your fault. There is no one. Even in modern relationships, the woman needs to make the man happy, control him, make sure that there's peace in the house is on her shoulders, right? And for the longest time, it was on my shoulders, right? If somebody was upset, I am not going to figure out that this logical challenge, I'm going to look at it as I did something wrong. And it's a very easy mistake to make. And it's a mistake in which I would say 9 out of 10 women in Pakistan understanding. But also, there's a very big hashtag in the white world called Why I Stayed. So you're asking a hashtag question. Why do women stay? Women stay because generally it's a patriarchal institution, right? And in patriarchy, there's systemic power dynamics that are built in a way in which if you're under a situation where you don't want to be in, avenues of you to, raise your hand and say, yeah, I don't know about this. There are very few, and they're global. We see that, with Dr. Ford, for instance, and Kavanaugh. I mean, the White House more replete with it. In our cultures, the elders step in to be like, hey, figure it out. Let's figure it out together. So there's more of a social construct around it where there's checks and balances, as brothers or the husband's parents or somebody steps in to be like, hey, first of all, conflict is normal. And in intimate relationships, conflict is even more normalized. But at what point do you realize that this group is in a need for help? It's a cry for help, right? And that line is constantly blurred because the institute itself is not designed for equality. It is designed for subversion. It came from the slavery era. It came from the feudal era. It's not supposed to be designed for equals, right? And so it will take some time for human psychology to shift around that as well. Now, the reason I got my recognition of this could be a problem the day I, held Yasser's CT scan against the light, and I was like, oh shit, like this is, this couldn't have been him. I mean, it all made sense to me. So in a way, I got vindicated for the slight doubt that I had, being like, if Yasser loses his temper, there is a limit to which the person that I know, this person is unrecognizable. So what's happening? It's now we know that it was probably a hemorrhage, and now we know that it was probably epileptic focal seizures. Now we know that it was the tumor personality. And then after the surgeries, all of that was cut. So now we know that there's traumatic brain injury that, did that. But it gave me permission to talk about something that a lot of women cannot talk about, There are a lot of people I know, educated women, young women, old women, white women, Russian women, Argentinian women who do exactly what I did just because they keep doubting it, and that this is so systemic, the intimate relationship, sometimes even without marriage, by the way, in which you self-blame rather than find out that this is and it's a public health problem, by the way, where one party is given permission, unchecked permission, to be angry at their wife. That's what marriage is, unfortunately.
Right. And just hypothetically speaking, Aisha, let's leave aside, Yasser's unique condition, his health issues, etc. How do you view other women who stay with abusive husbands? And should we as human beings ever be judgmental of those who choose to stay versus those who choose to leave? What would be your opinion on that, and where do you see it, and how do you see it?
I mean, look, a very simplistic perspective on this story would be like, what kind of phony feminist is she, right? But I think that it's far more complicated than that. At a certain point, abuse does not just remain one way, by the way. And this is what trauma does, right? If anyone who studies DV understands this, that sometimes when you're logically unsafe space, you become the perpetrator. Right? So, I mean, if I had the audacity to take Yasser to task, even risking the fact that some people might help stigmatize him, that's how shallow the world is. They would be like, oh, he's crazy, right? And that was a risk. But if I've taken that line and spoken about it, I could not speak about my role that were far, far from dignified in this entire equation, in which, like I said, I had my own little tumor happening in there where I wasn't I did things that I would never stand. No way. I had no locus standi to judge somebody who was mentally ill, because it's almost like God made me understand what happens when your trauma or your brain health is not optimal. And in a way, it came a full circle where I was like, okay. Now, having said that, just because we're cognitively understanding this doesn't mean it's been easy that, now we figure it out. It's still very, it's still hard for both of us. I'm sure it is for Yasser as well. But I think words and literature in a way has healed us, and it has allowed us to tell a narrative story and of the chaos. It's not chaos that kills people or separates people. It's not making sense of it. And in making sense of it, I think we found, some ways back to the beautiful off with, these two young people thinking they can fix everything and, fight over cutouts and stuff. So
Yeah, and just to add to what you've just said, Aisha, do you feel that there is an element of privilege here as well, with regards to women? For example, a strong, independent, working woman like yourself, who is financially stable and not dependent on anyone, versus maybe a certain class or section of society who are in abusive relationships and they aren't able to get out of it because they can't financially support themselves. So do you believe that privilege has a big role to play in whether in some women deciding to stay or to leave such abusive relationships?
I would actually challenge that and say that more powerful than privilege is ideas. So I think the real thing that is problematic here, that you or a woman shoulders on her shoulder honor of the family. If you look at the very rich or the very poor, they don't have that. And so when they are in a harmed situation, they're out of there. They don't even think about it. The reason for that is because honor culture is built in the middle class, and it's built to maintain stability of those already in power, i.e., men. So that I think is where the problem is. I was independent. I've always been, never sort of like, we've always had a shared approach to things. I could always walk away. I think the thing that kept me was the idea that I acted that Yasser wasn't well, but without knowing it. And I also wanted that to be true, by the way. It heals me in a way to believe that. And I do believe that, and I think that stopped me was just, like I said, it's so systemically difficult to do anything else, no matter how rich you are, no matter how privileged you are, because it always goes worse if you try a little bit, but you can't do too much, So I really sympathize with people who stay, but I also admire people who don't have the honor code because they don't have to be bound by, if that makes sense.
Right, absolutely. So Yasser, I would like to also bring you to this point. I recently read a book called 50 Million Rising by Sadia Zahidi, and I believe she is also of Pakistani origin, albeit a Swiss citizen. She's with the World Economic Forum. The 50 Million Rising, in the title, refers to the 50 million Muslim women the world over who are joining the workforce or who are already in the workforce. So, in the Bangladesh context, I know that we're extremely indebted to our working women for being, for everything that they've done in helping our economy to grow stronger. But for my knowledge about Pakistan, can you help me understand what is this also a norm in Pakistan? Do we see more women in the workforce, joining the workforce in Pakistan, or is this something that there's still a long way to go and there's still room for improvement? What would be your take on that?
Well, I would say, of course, Pakistan, is far from where it should be in terms of gender inclusion. But one can only speak to one's own experience, right? My mother is a working woman, sort of Aisha. Then I obviously was going to. So I've seen almost every person, every woman I know, as socially is a working. That's just my circle. But you're right. Pakistan has, I think, gender parity. Pakistan is what, like,
among the worst five always in the past forever.
Yeah, so the situation is, but there are, I mean, the fact of the matter is, unless your women basically are in the workforce, you're basically keeping 50% out, right? I mean, that's what
Jinnah said as well.
And Jinnah also said, no nation can rise to the heights of glory unless your women are side by side you.
Sure.
And that's where one looks at Bangladesh, and one's like, because that's where I think it's one of the things that your main politicians have done, the prime minister and the opposition leader. They've made women, basically the center of it. I mean, it could have happened in Pakistan with Benazir Bhutto, but there wasn't anyone on the other side. It was Benazir Bhutto carrying the burden herself, of that. But in Bangladesh, when we look at it, Pakistan is a long way from where Bangladesh is right now. And that, I think, if you think about it, several factors. First of all, I've always felt, and if I put on my sort of historian come biographer, etc. hat, I would say that the Bengali people in general are more advanced in their approach to politics, work, etc. They, in my opinion, not just Bangladeshis, but also East Bengalis, or sorry, West Bengalis, for that matter, they made the rest of the subcontinent. If you think about it, in their approach to these matters. I mean, I honestly believe that Pakistan would not have become this quasi theocratic state had the Bengali stayed with us. If you want to compare Bangladesh to Pakistan, obviously there is no comparison at the moment.
Okay, yeah, and I do thank you for saying that, Yasser, because if Bangladesh can help to serve as a model for any country to try and emulate, as far as I'm concerned, it just seems like a no-brainer that if you have something that works, why not just replicate it everywhere else, and everybody can benefit from those kind of policies once they're implemented. So, Aisha, coming back to you and your corporate experience in Pakistan. Would you like to share some anecdotes? You obviously have a couple of anecdotes in the book, but is there one anecdote, if you could pick one story about your experiences in the corporate sphere? Do please go ahead and mention it, because I'm sure that a lot of our viewers and listeners could benefit from it.
Um, I mean, the many so my career is like split in three sections, in which the first part was with the startup ecosystem. Then the second part in Pakistan was with the development sector, and then the third part was, say, with corporate. And before that, in the US, I worked at CNN and National Public Radio. So I studied to be a journalist, and I studied to be a filmmaker, actually. So, but somehow I ended up in media communications, and then I honed myself into corporate communications and public affairs. But I would the most bizarre experience. And by the way, Yasser has been very helpful whenever I come home with a bizarre experience, being like, I can't take this. Then he gives me cricket analogies about how he is hurt. Our mother-in-law is, sick and old, and the kids are in the pavilion waiting, and I'm the only batsman, and I got to do this right, and I just need to take ones, and definitely don't hit sixes, but stay in the game, until he recovers. But I think the most bizarre thing was where it was, I think, a development sector job, and my supervisor, was with the whole team in his room at 3 a.m. because that's pretty normal, deadlines and that kind of thing. And then everybody got up and left, and I was also leaving. And then he's like, "Hey, let's stay back and finish this last part," which seemed odd, but I was like, I finished it. But I was like, okay, fine, just do that shit. Next thing I know, I'm alone with him, which was a very uncomfortable situation, but I didn't think much of it because one doesn't think like that. And then he ended up proposing to me, I'd really like to be amazing. And how a situation can quickly get escalated, and it's like my entire world and my entire universe just ended there, because I've always place to earn in, and I've always needed a stable job. We've always had two incomes mostly, but we've always needed to combine it to raise the girls and that kind of thing. And for that moment, I was like, oh damn, because what that meant was work the next day. Because if I go to work the next day, I immediately, I excused myself from that situation and left. But what that meant was that now the cat was out of the bag. There was no pretense. I couldn't face this super. And I couldn't report him because this is how it works. It's so insidious that if you go after one person, the first thing they're going to say is she made it up. What was she doing late at night in his room, and all of that. And you said it myself, because I was like, what kind of women's rights advocate am I when I'm letting a perpetrator get away with it? But I had to quit the next day. Like I just had to go back home, and I was working in another city. Often I had to commute with the family in another place. Home, send in my resignation. It was really chaotic because I needed a job, and there was, I'm older now and I have a network. Back in the day, I used to go home, go to work, put my head down and work hard. I didn't really, have this support or depth. And it was really like I was out in the cold. I had a lot of forms I could have emailed, the helpline, called the helpline, told them what happened, and there would be repercussions. But then I would have a court of trial where my character would be put under a lot of scrutiny, and I wasn't going to win that war. So, like I said, I mean, when people say why I stayed, why I quit is also, something that, you look at your terrain and then you only play the card that you're going to win or you have a chance of winning. And in Pakistan, things are so terrible for women in the workforce, especially at assistant manager level or second, that it's even somebody as empowered as me could not fight that. And I'm just giving you that as an example of I ran away, and sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is run away.
I just want to say something is, can I?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Obviously this is sort of, I mean, if you look at it, your first question, why she stayed, why we stayed in this entire situation. I mean, as you have to give me this, that I was conscientious enough to realize that I was, sort of, there was something wrong with me and I maybe should do this. So this could, but the reason why we stayed was because of this fight that we had with what was otherwise a hostile environment. Just as, sort of chalk with their, Indian proverb, we were here in this hostile environment and we were stronger together, and that is why we stayed.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think if I can add, it's like Yasser and I came back to our country being like, okay, we're the safest here. And turned out that we were just as unsafe because, classism, racism, nepotism, everybody needs to have a father in this country. And both our fathers are dead. And even when they were alive, they were definitely not minting money. So we had that understanding that we belong to some kind of minority group and we can never make it in this country. Social clout, we don't have the other kinds of equity. And, we have two beautiful little egglings together and we got to stick it out for them, somehow. And also, there's a big joke, but we never wanted to leave each other. And so why we stayed. It's like when I was like, I'm done, he's like, no, please stay. And then when he was done, I was like, no, please stay. So, yeah.
Yes. And I think you mentioned that. Absolutely. Yes, indeed. And I believe you mentioned it in the book, Aisha, that you guys never wanted to leave each other at the same time, and so that really played a big role in that. Yes.
Yeah.
And guys, I have to say one more thing that in that answer you mentioned your daughters, and I think that we would be doing an injustice to this episode if we didn't mention Zoe and Zaini, your two beautiful daughters. Would you both agree that they have been your greatest achievement in life? Keeping, leaving aside Yasser, your self-actualization projects, being a barrister from Lincoln's Inn, and Aisha being a career woman in the corporate world. Is it fair to say that Zoe and Zaini have been your greatest achievement?
Absolutely, hands down.
And I would say, I mean, this afternoon, I needed some advice on something, and Zoe came back with all the advice. And I mean, it's just they're so smart and such intelligent young women. I absolutely must have done something right to deserve.
He's right, and I say that that's what got him really good kids. And I'm just generally nice, so I get good kids.
Sure.
But yeah, but a little about Zoe and Zani, I think that we've not at all as parents, and let's just say that we took generational trauma and multiplied it by a billion and hurled it towards them like meteors, right? And I talk about that in the book. I've been quite a terrible mom, especially in the initial years, and and if this is a story, I think it's a story of redemption, and that it's a nice thing that somebody can walk their bad behavior back, they can walk their traumas back, and the brain has plasticity and it can head towards the light. And we're trying to do that now. We're trying to be good by them. They totally don't think we're cool. Like they're just like, he has a lot of people that come up to him and they're like, wow, that to me, and just roll their eyes and they're like, oh my God, if they only knew, how dysfunctional and, they also use the word pathetic they are. But they're really, really wonderful children. And what I do wish for them is that they rise above our flaws, Yeah.
One. I think that's so beautifully said. Yes, absolutely. And I just want to say, Aisha, that one of the things I really loved about the book is how Yasser's character, in particular, oscillates between being the primary antagonist to being the comic relief character. So and I'm putting it in literary terms. there is one particular story where there's the both of you as well as Zoe and Zaini, and you all went to for an interview at the U.S. Embassy, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And that was a
Correct.
hilarious chapter. Would you like to just tell us very briefly about that particular incident and what exactly was going on? Do please share it with our viewers and listeners.
So, the two teenagers behind us, Yasser and I, are at the immigration counter, immigration options, and this is the final interview. And they ask Yasser a question about, have you done anything that should be declared? And Yasser goes ahead and, given his, extreme honesty and artistic trait, I don't know if it's a moral trait, but it's definitely, and he said, yes, I have done something I'd like to declare. And the girls just had a field day with it, being like, oh my God, our dad's a thug, and we knew it. It was like a cute little story where Yasser was once after a girl who didn't want him. And there's only people with generational trauma like him. And there was that. So they found that. And the immigration guy just looked at Zoya and Zainab, they'd spoken to him and he was very impressed by them. And he said, it looks like your heart's healed, So that was like a cute moment where we're like laughing.
Oh, absolutely. And I could just imagine it in my head where usually the family puts up a united front and closes ranks, but then to have one, member just go the exact, do a complete 180. So I cannot imagine how hilarious that
Exactly.
situation must have been. So yes, it really comes up
Yeah,
really
it
well.
was really hilarious. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think it's very cute in the sense that the traits and quirks about Yasser that were cute, and like you said, have comic relief, like his insane honesty. Like if I tell, like I was like, "You're late," he's like, "No, I came here at 8:56." He'd have the exact time, which is comic relief. Now I hated that about him, and somehow, like I say, God just brings me back into the circle of my own reckoning. Both Zoe and Zainab have his traits, so there's no way that I thought about them, right? The exact things that I may be upset about in him, that when I see them I see it in the girls, they're just so adorable. And so I think in a way, I think taught spiritual lessons over and over again.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so at this point in time, guys, I have a couple of staple questions to ask because we are, after all, a podcast about books, so it's in the title. So, Yasser, I remember we asked you those questions during your episode. So let me, Aisha, put forward these questions to you. Are you more of a
Sure.
fiction person or a non-fiction person? What genre of books do you enjoy reading?
Fiction.
Fiction? Okay. Any?
I absolutely love fiction, and I was introduced to fiction through Margaret Atwood, and I absolutely love her. And she's kind of like my little Jinnah. I mean, she's my Jinnah, so she can do no wrong. I wish I had her cut out. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale was my beginning of an understanding of what happens in totalitarian states that use the institution marriage or fertility to control women. And so I think Heart Tantrums and Brain Tumors is my little revolt, for that reason. I think that women should just handmaidens. They are, just, worthy of dignity. So yeah, fiction, because in fiction you can say things you can't say in real life.
Okay, absolutely. And I just want to add, has Yasser won you over to the Matthew Shardlake series yet?
Yeah, I mean he's so excited when he talks about them, about this hunchback and how I should about it. And like I just enjoy his storytelling version of it. But remember that for the longest time Yasser did, have so many of his faculties leave him. Yasser couldn't read. And I've always known him as an avid reader. In fact, my yearning to write comes from him, where he would just once like walk out on his phone, he would be able to write a 4,000 word article in 10 minutes. He has a photographic memory and his brain is so sharp, and I'd be like, I want to do that. And then there was a time where he could look at a word and not be able to read it. So he's lost so much of his cognitive abilities, and some of them have come back to him. By brain tumor disease, the saddest thing I've seen is his loss of reading fiction, because I think it really made him happy, and he can no longer, I think, do that with concentration.
Okay. And so the second staple question, Aisha, that I have for you is, and it's a tough one. So far that's the one response that I keep getting consistently from all our guests, but I'm sure you can give us a good answer. And the question is, if you could select a book that you feel that every young person should read at least once in their lifetime, it may or may not be fiction, it may or may not be nonfiction, but something that is useful or edifying, what would be that one particular book that you would pick?
Can I just say The Handmaid's Tale?
Sure.
I'm sorry, it's so boring, but I keep saying that, and the reason is because that is our reality. Women are literally vessels for birthing children, and everybody should read what happens when that happens. However, I will give you an alternate to that, since I already mentioned it. I'm currently reading Zen Eco-Maintenance. It's a non-fiction book about a man and his son on a journey, and it's about mental health, actually. So I'm really loving that as well, and since it's at the top of my mind, I think everybody should read it.
Okay.
It's about philosophy.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So we'll definitely have that in the description. And
it wasn't that hard. I thought you were going to make me choose between who I love more, my mom or my dad. No.
No, the book-related questions. So yes. So thank you so much for that answer, Aisha. Okay, so guys, we're pretty much coming to the end of our episode. But I just want to say that my thanks to both of you for participating in this episode. And this is in fact the first time we've had two guests on the show, because we usually do one-to-one interviews. But yes, I'm extremely thrilled that the both of you had the time to come on and to talk about a truly fabulous piece of work that you've done, Aisha. I actually, before we started the episode, I actually came up with a couple of um, adjectives or ways to describe the book, and so I'll just throw them out before we end it. So raw, unfiltered, astonishing, extraordinary, salacious, shocking, disturbing, dark, humorous, self-deprecating, witty, and brilliant. So that's how I would describe the book. It is an extremely fabulous read, wonderful read, and I would really encourage everybody here who is listening or watching this podcast to go and pick up the book.
Much, and thank you for being such a diligent reader, Umar. I am glad you picked up on things that I don't even remember writing. So great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank
not
you.
a problem. Okay, so for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you once again for staying till the end. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon. You can also download the episode on Apple, Google, or Spotify. Let me just grab the book from behind me. The book, once again, is Heart Tantrums by Aisha Sarwari. Please go ahead and buy the book. It's a fantastic book written by a fabulous author. And Aisha and Yasir, thank you once again for both being on the show. I really hope to have you guys back for a future episode. Once, Yasir, you finish your book on Kemal Atatürk, I believe you're writing a book on him, correct? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And Aisha, for yourself, any future writing projects that your fans and readers can look forward to?
I can't believe there would be anyone who's my fan, but I think hopefully everybody in your podcast after listening to this like what I do. I do think I want to diversify a little bit, but I want to write like a nonfiction next. I've started doing some interviews, and it's about a politician's wife.
Oh, a politician's wife. Oh, I love the
No,
title.
don't
The
say
way
much.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll definitely keep our eyes out for that. How far along are you, Aisha? And how soon can we expect that book to come out? So if you could give us some hints.
I had an idea in my head. I've talked to my agent about it. He thinks it's a great idea, but he's waiting for me to prove it to him that I can actually finish it.
Okay, understood.
Yeah,
So
we're there. Yeah.
Okay, so incubation stage. So we'll definitely
incubation stage.
Right. So we'll definitely wait.
Yeah, but I'm going to do something about it because
Okay, for sure. Okay, so guys, thank you once again for your time, and you guys have a good day, and let's catch up soon.
Thank you so much, Umar. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Umar. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye for now.